Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia Live. My name is Joe Milbank, one of Concordia's programming associates, and I'm so pleased to have you all here with us today. A special thank you to our global patron member, Henley and Partners, for organizing today's important discussion. In today's Concordia Live, we will explore the work of the Andon Foundation and their goal of establishing the first free global city for refugees. It's crucial that refugees be recognized for the unique skills and talents they bring, an untapped resource, diligence, and human ingenuity readily available to work, to produce, and to create. Our panelists will discuss the quest to establish the first free global city for refugees and well-managed investments that, in addition to delivering a second chance for refugees, lead to increased productivity, a growing GDP to the host country, returns to private stakeholders, and domiciles for anyone who chooses to make them their new home. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees are automatically muted upon entry, but we hope that you'll take advantage of the chat feature to introduce yourself, react to comments in the discussion, and engage throughout the conversation. Lastly, this webinar will be recorded and available on Concordia's webpage and YouTube channel. Now, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce today's moderator, Lorena Boy. Lorena is the program director for Upwardly Global New York, a national organization working to eliminate systemic employment barriers for immigrant and refugee professionals while advancing the inclusion of their skills into the US economy. A resettled refugee from Liberia, she came to the US when she was only 4 years old. Her family fled war in Liberia and the continuous harassment from government soldiers and rebels. Lorena has 18 years of experience working with vulnerable and marginalized populations, inclusive of the immigration and refugee resettlement space. Prior to her role with Upwardly Global, Lorena served as an associate director of student services for the Year Up Philadelphia program, where she helped lead the development of overall program structures and advanced strategic partnerships with community-based organizations and social service agencies on mental health, housing, pregnancy parenting, financial services, family issues, and substance abuse. Lorena currently serves as chair of the board of directors for Refugee Congress, a refugee-led organization that ensures that the lived expertise of forcibly displaced people is leveraged to promote policies and programs that protect the rights and well-being of all forcibly displaced people. Lorena also serves on the board of Refugee Council USA, a coalition which mobilizes expertise, ideas, and influence to protect the rights of forcibly displaced people and build more welcoming societies. She was recently selected to serve on the newly launched advisory board to the UNHCR task team on engagement and partnership with organizations led by displaced and stateless persons. Lorena holds a Bachelor of Science in Management from Rutgers University and a Master's of Arts in Social Work from Temple University in Philadelphia. Lorena, over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to join you all today to moderate such an innovative panel. Before we get started, I want to set the stage for our conversation today. Just today, and it continues to grow, there are 103 million forcibly displaced people worldwide, which is inclusive of those who are internally displaced, refugees, asylum seekers, stateless people, and others who are in need of international protection. The US, along with other countries such as Canada, continue to think of innovative strategies to bring people to safety, whether through family reunification or most recently in the US, community sponsorship, which will engage our broader communities in the act of welcoming. The new Welcome Corp, which is a consortium of 9 entities whose collective expertise of resettlement, protection, community organizing, etc., will help implement community sponsorship as a solution for refugees. Our objective with our time today is to hear from Henley and Partners about the work of the Andon Foundation and their mission to establish the first global refugee city, which serves as an innovative and alternative solution to the displacement crisis. As a former refugee from Liberia, West Africa, I did not experience life in a refugee camp, but my family and I had to flee to the Ivory Coast and figure out how to survive until we were ultimately afforded the opportunity to resettle here in the United States. I've worked in resettlement and have heard stories of life in refugee camps, and also have family, friends, and colleagues who have lived in refugee camps and share concerning and often disturbing stories about life in a camp. Refugees face many barriers that prevent them from using their skills and talents when they are in countries of asylum or when they're ultimately resettled in countries such as the US. With that being said, I'm looking forward to this discussion and to hear about the vision for the global refugee city, as I'm sure you all are as well. So at this time, I want to turn the mic over to our panelists to introduce themselves. First, starting with Dr. Christian Kaelin, who's the founder and chairman of the Annan Foundation and considered one of the world's foremost experts in immigration law and practice, and specifically investment migration and citizenship by investment, a field he pioneered. Dr. Kaelin?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lorena. I think you said already everything in terms of introduction. So, but to come to Undone Foundation, which I founded a couple of years ago, you know, that is very interesting. What we do, not because of what we do in the refugee space, which is important, and I've been also involved in since over 20 years, but because of this, what you mentioned, this innovative idea to actually build an entire city. That's not an upgraded refugee camp, I would like to say right from the beginning, but actually a really good place where people would want to move to. Maybe even alternatively to, let's say, United States or Germany or wherever else you may have an option to go to, like you, Lorena, had. Many have not. You know, many do not have this option. So I think with that, I would leave it in terms of intro, because as you said already, you know, I'm a lawyer and focused on immigration law since a long time and handling partners and also this Undone Foundation. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kaelin. And next, Mikael Møller, who's former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations.
So thank you, Lorena. I'm from Denmark. As you just said, I used to work for the UN. I retired 4 years ago as an Under-Secretary General, and at that time as head of the UN office in Geneva. I've done over 40 years of work for the United Nations, a little bit everywhere on the planet, and doing a lot of very different things. I started out in the High Commissioner for Refugees, working with the refugees on the ground for several years before then moving on to other things. It has been a formative career, if you want, also in terms of what we are talking about today, in terms of also the understanding of the integrated nature of the problems that we're looking at today and that we need to solve, and understanding the integrated nature of the solutions that we need to apply to them. And the crying need to figure out how we are going to work together in very different ways, how we're going to de-silo our approaches to the problems that we have, and how we're going to understand in very different ways the kinds of things that we need to do. And I think it's very important. Christian and Dr. Kaelin said it very clearly at the beginning, that the cities that we're talking about are not just a sort of reconfiguration of a refugee camp. Because part of the big problem of the refugee, particularly the refugee problems that we've seen over the years, is that we have this, again, this silo understanding of what you do with refugees, and this bizarre thing that you sort of plunk them in a camp and then pretty much forget about them and and completely misuse an extraordinary amount of human capacity, ingenuity, and cultural backgrounds that can enrich any kind of other society that comes in. So the kind of solution we're going to talk about today is really out of the box, but it's out of the box because we have to be out of the box, and because we have to figure out how we find win-win solutions, both for the refugees and for the countries in which they find themselves, and from the world at large, because if it's done right, what is going to happen is to be an extraordinary engine for economic development, both locally and globally. So we'll come back to these issues.
Thank you so much, Mikael. And finally, we have another Mikael in the room, Mikael Cassar. And I know he was having slight mic issues. Are you good to go now?
I hope so. It's
Awesome. Yep, we can hear you. Uh-oh. Perhaps keeping your camera off and trying to speak might help with the connection.
Maybe I'm back now. I get thrown out of the meeting like every few minutes, but I'll try to be brief while I'm in, and then I'll get back. My name is Mikael Ribbenvik Cassar, and I'm also, like the other Michael, I'm also retired, but only since 24 hours. And the last 7 years, I've served as the Director General for the Swedish Migration Agency. And among other things, I've been overseeing our resettlement program that's been ongoing for 70 years, and also traveled the world to different refugee camps, participating in resettlement missions. So that's basically me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and I hope you don't get kicked out again. But so now we're going to shift our focus into the questioning. I have a few questions that I will be posing to each of you, some of which you are able to also jump in just in case the question wasn't posed to you specifically. But I just kind of wanted to once again set that foundation before we move into our questioning. Just similar to what I said earlier, this refugee question is a topic that features prominently in the media, in private conversations, and in fiercely divisive political debates around the world. This year, the number of displaced people, as I mentioned, is about 103 million, and that number will continue to grow. Until a few years ago, there were only half that many. So as I mentioned, this will continue, but we know, and we've seen, and we're hearing that some of this is driven by climate change and, of course, political unrest in many regions. According to the UN, we're estimating several hundred more and more refugees to be expected in the future. So I want to pose the first question to Dr. Kaelin. Dr. Kaelin, as founder and the chairman of the Anden Foundation, you have a vision to build the first global city, primarily for refugees and migrants, but also open for others that would consider moving there as well. What are the characteristics of the Anden global city you are proposing? And how could the creation of such a city reform how we deal with the global growing refugee and migration crisis?
Yeah, thank you, Lorena. I mean, first of all, indeed, it's a growing crisis. You mentioned over 100 million refugees, registered refugees today. There will probably be quite a few more than that in reality. And estimates go from a couple of 100 million up to 2 billion displaced people around the world because of increased political instability and also climate change you mentioned. So in any case, we're going to deal with a lot more people that are or have to go somewhere else. And of course, the primary aim will always remain to enable people to repatriate to their home countries. People don't easily leave their home if they really have to, if they really don't have to. So that's also what people don't realize. Like you don't cross the Mediterranean if at home it's really bad, if it isn't really bad. So this is something we need to keep in mind, that we anyway have gonna
Christian is blocked.
Dr. Kaelin, looks like we got frozen there, if you can hear us. Okay, so we'll pause there with that question and wait for Dr. Kaelin to join. But in the meantime, I will shift. I have a question for you, Mikael Møller. So with your experience working with UNHCR and in displacement in general, what is your view on the role of cities in addressing the global challenges of the 21st century?
I think before answering in detail, I think that we need to sort of keep in mind the framework within which our discussion is happening, and the sort of broader frame that we are talking about, because there are several elements that fit together to make the answer quite positive at the end of the day. First of all, we are going through a demographic transition, where there are more people living in cities now than not, and the projections are that by 2050 we're going to have about 2/3 of the world population in cities in one form or the other. We have another aspect of the demographic transition is the migration we're talking about. The fact that we may have about 100 million refugees and at least that number in terms of migrants. We also have a lot of internally displaced persons. This is going to continue, both in terms of refugees that flee persecution and flee war, but also increasingly what we call climate refugees. You're going to have more and more people trying to migrate because they're looking for a new and better life. What is happening right now is that these two categories of people have been conflated by many people, the press and others, and it's not very helpful, because refugees, at least in international law, are being dealt with very differently than migrants who are simply looking for a better life. Both of them have equally good reasons and should be accepted in one form or the other, but it needs to be cleared up a little bit, and we need to be very clear who we're talking about when we talk about that. The other thing that is happening is the role of cities in general. Cities are becoming more and more dynamic entities in practically all areas of human activity. And we are seeing, also because of the changing demographics and the fact that these cities are becoming more and more important, that they are becoming actors in global governance in their own right. And what we are also seeing is that because of the nature of cities and the fact that the leadership of cities is much closer to the needs of the citizens and are able to deliver those needs in a much better way than national governments, you're also seeing a change in the quality of leadership, where many would say to you that the real innovative, out-of-the-box thinking politicians on our planet today are mayors of big cities. So there is a dynamic that has installed itself, that make it clear that cities more and more are going to be really important players in the way that we manage the affairs of our planet. Also in terms of the big existential problems that we are faced with, whether it's climate, whether it's health, whether it's inequalities, whether it's corruption, whether it's, whatever, all of these big ticket items that we all struggle with are being dealt with better in cities than they are at national level, and in some cases also good in regional levels, but mostly it's clear that the tendency is going in the way of cities. So when you keep that in mind and you look for solutions that are different than the ones we have dealt with for the past 80 years or more in terms of how we deal with refugees and how we take care of them, then cities make a lot of sense, particularly if we manage to convince either groups of countries or regions or a combination of private and public partnerships in terms of financing to start building cities that will become sustainable economic entities that actually are going to help in the growth and the maintenance of the regions they're in as viable places for the future and for the future of our descendants. So that's a long answer to tell you that yes, I think that the idea of cities specifically targeted, at least initially, as repositories, if you want, or recipients for these for people who need to find a place to live in a much more structured way, in a much more healthy environment, and in a place where they can be their qualities and whatever they can provide is brought to bear, and so that we don't waste human knowledge and human activity as we are doing now.
Maybe if I could add to this long answer, a little bit more. I think the most important thing I was about to say, and then I think I was thrown out of the meeting. I rejoined. You can hear me now. The main thing is, so the repatriation of people is of course priority, but very often that's not possible. And then the second thing is, of course, if enough country allow refugees to settle, resettle, and be employed and be playing part of the society, that's of course wonderful. But as we all know, the political reality is in many places that, first of all, politically, it is, convenient always to blame foreigners, and in particular, vulnerable foreigners like refugees. They are often not welcome. They are viewed as a problem rather than a resource. And so politically, in many parts of the world, in fact, in most countries, it's just not possible to easily let in a lot of people to resettle. It's just not politically feasible. And because of this reality, which in my opinion, many global institutions that are looking at that are actually in a way, systematically overlooking, because there is this nice notion of universally applicable human rights and UN Charter and refugee protection and all these nice rules that basically countries don't necessarily follow. And therefore, what we're saying is what is needed is a place where refugees are not just tolerated and maybe resettled at the bottom of society and with difficult political resistance, but actually a place where people are actually welcome. And, we have very good examples in the past. In fact, many countries, if you look at the United States, is one of them, they have been literally built by refugees, by people who had to flee from somewhere else. But the difference is the United States gave them a new home. A new future, and this unleashes the human spirit and energy. And this is what we want to change with the city, to see refugees as a huge opportunity. And as I said very briefly, we don't want to also just, what I said before, we don't only just want to build cities for refugees only, but actually for people who wish to go to a cool, new, dynamic place where, like maybe the United States used to be, 100 years ago, where people from all over the world came to New York from all over the world to build a new life. And there was a very dynamic environment. And we want to build a kind of combination of, 1920s New York and Hong Kong and Dubai, where not just refugees, but everybody is welcome, that has its own immigration system that is much more progressive than what you currently have.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Kaelin and Mikael. This conversation is really interesting. As I mentioned earlier, in refugees and immigrants, when they come into this country, like, they face so many barriers, and to really, hear this sort of like solution that's focused on, cities, and also emphasizing the fact that, as Mikael mentioned, there's this sense of waste, having people clumped up in one space and them not being able to use their talent and skills. And when they are ultimately, resettled, if possible, they face barriers, right? I see this every day in my work at Upperly Global. We're working with professionals who come into the US and their skills are often not recognized, and they face many barriers to really be able to work in fields of their profession that match their skills. So really interesting to hear this. And I think another important note that you mentioned, Dr. Kaelin, is that, no one ultimately wants to leave if they don't have a reason to. So just wanted to highlight and emphasize those points. Before I move on to the next question, I see your hand raised, Mikael. You wanted to add something?
Yeah, but yes, I do. But before that, I don't know if Michael Cassar wants to jump in. He's actually the one who probably has most to say about refugees of all of us on this panel, having knowing his career.
Yeah, Mikael, are you there? We'd love to hear your input here.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now, I think the refugee camp is it's like the emergency ward of a hospital. You can't stay there for the rest of, you need to pass through it, and then you need to get on. And the only mechanism we have for this today is the resettlement schemes and programs. Not many countries are doing this. and many countries cut down on it also, because it's totally voluntarily, and you don't have to, there's no international rules saying you have to do this. My country, Sweden, last year we had 5,000 resettlement places. This year we will have 900. So you see, this could be go up and down, and mostly down. So I think, I mean, the idea that Chris have is, I think it's so beautiful. It's very nice. But then you have people like me, because I'm a bureaucrat. It's rules and regulations, you know, because the main concern here is with 100 million people plus, you still need to say who can come and who can't. I mean, there's realities, because otherwise you would just create another refugee camp in another part of the world. But the strength in this idea is to have people come and being welcome. I would certainly suggest that you go straight to citizenship, in a broader context, however the constitution would be. And that the city would be having hard targets populating the city, which is very different than resettlement programs today. And but it needs to be regulated, of course, and that's always the boring part to talk about, and that's where people like I come in. But I think the thought is beautiful, and it needs to be molded to become a practical solution.
If I may just one thing, Michael, I don't think that's actually the boring part here, because to create an immigration system that is progressive and proactive for this is actually really interesting. You might look at it differently when you can say, you know, how can we design a system that is actually welcoming people rather than making it really difficult? You know, this is actually the main problem with established countries like Sweden or Switzerland or US, that, you know, it's difficult. You know, but when imagine a city where people actually can actively arrive and immediately work, immediately, you know, start their business, immediately be active. This is really what we want to do. So very important to note also here is the notion that this city has to be very autonomous. It has to have, for instance, its own immigration system and own borders, just like, for instance, Hong Kong has. This is really critical. And to have this autonomy is very difficult, because you need to get a country that allows this to happen. And that's the really difficult thing we are working on.
So thank you, Michael and Dr. Kaelin. And something interesting that, you know, you mentioned with regards to the, you know, the ramifications around the legalities of what the city might look like. Dr. Christian, have you thought about some of these parameters? Like, what would some of the parameters be? And also, you know, given that the Anden Global City will be created from scratch, what is your idea on the ideal immigration system as an alternative to the current one?
Well, I'll be very happy to hear actually Michael's view as well, Michael Ribbenvik's.
Yeah, Michael, you want to start?
I mean, we have a beautiful convention, the Geneva Convention of 1951, which was obviously written in a different context. It's post-war Europe, worked fine for the Iron Curtain, and there's many voices now saying it's outdated, even within the UNHCR, I would say. But without it, there's nothing. So if it would ever be open for renegotiation, we would lose it. So, but here we're talking about something completely different. This is a blank page, and then you shouldn't start in the 1950s. Actually, you should do something completely different. And I think, for one thing, asylum determination, which I worked with all my life. We shouldn't do that. I mean, we should just go on objective criteria. You know, it's easier. You don't create backlogs. You don't have. You're in a camp. You can come. Not all, because there won't be room for all. You could have a subjective criteria also for your humanitarian status. so you can find a new way of doing this without processes that takes years and you have backlogs, and make it simple, because there's a lot of people here. There's no shortage of people here, so you can make that very much easier, I think. Security concerns, there's always security concerns. That would be one thing to tackle. I mean, not for that's for your fellow citizens of the city. Everybody wants to be safe. For governments, it's more easy to have access to different information and lists and run it by that. For here, it would be more difficult, but I think that element should be there also. But plainly, scrap traditional asylum determination, make it simple. If you're in the camp, you're eligible. If you're not a security threat, you're eligible. Selection because many would be eligible, right? So selection would be, that would be the thing that you have to think about. What should it be? Would it be the need of the city in the building up phase? Should it be the person's humanitarian situation? Combination of the two? Those would be very interesting to discuss those. But once you have a system like that, you can then the process wouldn't be the big thing. Once you're cleared for that, you can come. And as I said before, I think it's very important with total participation and full inclusion. So whatever kind of citizenship you would have in the city, you would get that immediately. You wouldn't go through these, 5 or 7 or 8 years probation periods that we have today, because you're included and you can start help building. And then work with targets. The growth of the city is what's determining the success. If it's growing fast, there's a lot of people that can come. And that would be the obvious goal. Some initial thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you. And I know, Mikael, apologies, I know your hand has been up for some time. Did you want to address the previous question, or did you want to chime into what some of these ideas on the ideal immigration system might look like?
Yeah, I just want to come in, and what I have to say that touches on everything that has been said so far. But I just want to remind us that, and I come back to this, what I said earlier about this framework, the broader framework in which we are having this discussion, but also in which a thing like this initiative will happen, and if it's successful. And that is that we are in a very interesting and deep governance transition, have been for a while. The business of having only governments or states sitting around the decision-making table is fast coming to an end. There will be other actors around that decision-making table, and including mayors and leaders of cities globally who can be part of the discussion. And why not also refugees? I mean, when you look at some of the most successful governance structures in the international system right now, they are multi-stakeholder governance structures that deliver much better and much more imaginative and innovative solutions than the normal traditional governance structures that we have, whether they're governments or whether they're international organizations or whatever. So it's always a problem when we talk about how we're going to go about a completely new idea and looking into the future, because most people sort of apply their experiences that are rooted in the present and in the past to something that is entirely new, and that needs to be entirely new. We need to think outside the box in ways that, on this issue at least, nobody has, or very few people have, apart from Christian. And so I find hope in that, if you want. I think it is possible to do the kinds of things that both Mikael and Christian has said needs to be done. It just needs to be done with tools that are different than the ones that created the system that we've had until now, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's possible. As the time goes by and the need grows and reality imposes itself on us, as it always does at the end of the day, we will find innovative and imaginative solutions to get to these kinds of solutions that are going to be very, that simply make sense.
Thank you, Michael. I, totally want to highlight the fact that, we're, especially now in this day and age, we're really moving into the direction of having refugees themselves at some of these tables. I know you talked about, mayors and cities, and also, refugees playing a role. We're in this day and age, and I'm representing also Refugee Congress, and a lot of what you're saying is the direction in which we're moving, and making sure that these policies and initiatives that are set in stone, or ideas are coming up about issues that affect refugees. Refugees themselves should also be at those tables. So I would love to hear what the thoughts are around that, Dr. Kaelin, because I know although the purpose of this city is to help to, it's not only a humanitarian project, right? It's also a profitable business idea as well. And I know I would love to also hear, how could the establishment of a first global city benefit investors as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we've studied is that, over years, is that, existing systems are very hard to reform and to reinvent themselves. It's a bit what Mikael Møller just said, so we need to think out of the box. So it's very unlikely that existing structures will be fast enough and successful enough in doing something even close to what we plan to do. So in our view, it is necessary to have private investors driving that, and it has to make sense. I also don't think anything you do is very sustainable if it's not on a long-term basis providing a return for all stakeholders. So if you have this to finance privately, you need to have a return also for stakeholders. This is, of course, for investors as stakeholders. So this is, of course, something that many in the humanitarian sector don't like to hear, because they are used to just working on grants from governments or private. So basically a handout system. We think of this very differently. We think that we need to create an environment where people can thrive and create economic value. And that needs to be pre-financed to a large extent privately, basically building the infrastructure for it. And to some extent with state support. It doesn't work without state support, because, as I said before, you need the framework, the legal constitutional framework, but also the land. So ideally, very ideally, to make it simple, we go to a country where a large tract of land that is not currently used and nobody wants that land is given to us, either on a long-term lease or acquired. But ideally, the government, the country, the host country is a partner in this, and private investors actually build the infrastructure. Then people move there, and of course every beginning is difficult, but assume you have a first 20,000, 30,000 people resettled there and being economically active. We already work in that regard in Andon Foundation with different projects where, for instance, people are trained in refugee camps, young people, to computer code, okay, to become computer programmers. This is a skill you can use all over the world. And currently worldwide, you have many hundreds of thousands of open jobs. Okay, so currently it's quite interesting. There are many hundreds of thousands of computer engineers missing. But they could work remotely, and many things in such a city would operate like this, that it is a global commercial hub, a trading hub, and a lot of such remote work where economic value is created. So if you create economic value, you will also translate this into the value of the infrastructure that is being built, the houses and other things that are being, commercial buildings and so on. Because that's financed privately. Alone, there are other factors, but alone on the real estate side, there will be significant returns for the private capital that finances the infrastructure. And I firmly believe that if we are able to do this in one place, that this will be quite successful, even if it's not a multi-million inhabitant city, which is, however, the aim. The aim is to build relatively large structures, because you need certain critical mass, but it also works even with about 100,000 inhabitants. And I believe if we're able to do this in one place and you can show it is a thriving city where people are happy and actually the host country benefits, and it makes a lot of sense. I believe almost every country in the world will want such a city or several cities. And it's like what Mikael Møller said earlier, if you look at the global trend in urbanization, we're going to need hundreds of cities anyway, globally. And we would like to build this autonomous model where rule of law and certain principles are enshrined in a very efficient, to a good extent, privately driven system where people are basically given a good environment to thrive. And that is the key thing, because we would like to look at refugees as a very positive resource. You know, the most important thing on everywhere, the most important thing is human capacity, human spirit, human ingenuity. You know, that's the key thing everywhere for living together, for economic activity. And if you make people thrive in an environment, you can create enormous value. I mean, you've seen this in the past in the United States. I mean, today the US, is maybe somewhere at its peak or maybe past its peak, I don't know. But, if you look at how the US, emerged out of a small colony of England within a short period of time. And there are many other such examples where basically through immigrants that could thrive, built, a formidable country. And unfortunately, today we can't just simply create another country just like that. It's a bit complicated because there isn't so much. Everything is divided by national states, borders, and so on. But we can create another Hong Kong that is very autonomous, that has its own immigration system, own court system, that is very efficient in providing its services to its inhabitants, and where people really can thrive. And then I believe there is an enormous economic activity and cultural activity and human activity possible, where people actually want to move to, and not just refugees. This is also very important. We don't want to build an upgraded refugee camp. It's actually for everybody that can contribute and wants to go there. It should be for people who want a dynamic environment, like you might want to move to Dubai or Hong Kong today because it's dynamic. You might want to move to that city.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So I will ask one more question, and then I will give each of you a chance to give some final words that you would like to leave with our audience here. So Dr. Christian, you mentioned the idea of having skilled people who will come to these cities to live, right? Refugees who are, and then you mentioned the potential or possibility of them being trained, right? Some of them before, maybe moving to these city structures. So the question I have is, do you feel that there will be some sort of like partnership and collaboration with maybe entities such as UNHCR and or local NGOs to provide the necessary training that might be needed before these individuals ultimately relocate to the cities?
I think it is very important what Mikael Ribbenvik said before, and of course from his experience running an immigration authority in a country like Sweden that is traditionally very welcoming to people coming into Sweden. You still need rules, you still need restrictions, because it cannot just be open to everybody. It has to have certain rules. It has to have an immigration system, but a much more unbureaucratic one, a much more faster one. And essentially, if you think of populating or expanding a city, you need everything, in terms of skills. You need everybody, from doctors and nurses to bus drivers to CEOs to engineers. So basically, the city recruits what it needs. And this creates absolutely
looks like we lost Dr. Kaelin again. All right, so why don't we hear from Mikael Cassar and then Mikael Møller with final remarks that you have and that you want to leave us with.
Thank you, Lorena. Now, like to go back to what you were saying about the importance of participation, being at the table for refugees. The nice thing about Andan Global City would be it's built by refugees. It's not nobody would need to be invited to the table. They are the table. And also what Chris was saying before about how people who are resettled sometimes are treated and how they manage in their new home country with integration and things like that. That's another beauty with Andan Global City, that majority population people come from all over the world with different culture, different. There would be nothing to integrate into, and we often in Europe and need to maybe more integrate, but it would be full integration. Integration would be, yeah, that would be a concept of integration. There's no majority population.
Sorry, Michael, we slightly lost you there towards the end. If you can just repeat that last statement, and then we'll shift it over to Michael Møller. Looks like we... Are you there, Michael Cassar? Okay, so Michael Møller.
He's back.
Oh. Michael Cassar, we lost you towards the end. If you can hear me, would you mind just repeating the last kind of like sentence? All right, so why don't we hear from you, Michael Møller?
Right, this is kind of a closing remark, if I understood correctly. All right,
Correct.
well, let me sort of be brief. I think, first of all, that the idea of this city is a really good one. It makes a lot of sense in all dimensions that we have discussed, and probably many more. The second thing is that we're in a hurry. We need to speed it up, and we need to figure out how to do this the sooner the better, because the reasons for why we think that it's a good idea are, those reasons are growing and are becoming more difficult to deal with unless we start finding some seriously doable solutions. I think that, and this is part of what Christian is doing now, which is to enlarge a conversation and to bring in as many potential contributors, whether they're in the political sphere, in the financial sphere, in the private sector sphere, in the refugee sphere, around tables to really start pushing this. One of the conclusions that from what I said earlier is that if we sit around on our hands and expect governments to deal with this and to pick it up and do something about it, we're going to be sitting until kingdom come. We need to sort of take responsibility, each one of us, and push others to take responsibility to make this happen. And I think it's possible. I don't think this is a rocket science. I think it makes a lot of sense, and we know how to do it. And we have both the human and the financial resources to do it. As with many other of the problems that we're facing today, what we really need is a lot more will. And will, not just from politics, but everybody's will. We are now in a situation where every single one of us has a responsibility to take part both collectively and individually in the search for solutions.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Kaelin, I know you got cut off. Not sure if you just wanted to just take a couple of seconds to just say one last word.
Yeah, it goes for all of us. So, yeah, I just wanted to say, obviously, we are not naive either. To build an entire new city that is autonomous like Hong Kong is not an easy thing to do. It is probably one of the most complicated things you could do today. But we are aware of that, and we think it's still worth it, because all big ideas, they always sounded crazy at the beginning, and you still need to try. If you don't try, for sure it doesn't work. That's why I said we have to try that. And we're very, very active to discuss with governments. And of course, if that happens, we will need all hands on deck. So whoever has an idea or can contribute or wishes to be part of that, I encourage to contact us and to be part of that in the future, because it will be a rather large undertaking.
We need to get you to speak to the General Assembly of the UN and convince all the heads.
Probably. But as I said before, I don't have, like you, I don't know that you have the career there, but I see, unfortunately, there's a lot of talking in many of these institutions. And in the end, we need to move very fast. And I think you can only really move this privately, of course, with government interaction, but you need to privately move that forward. Otherwise, it just will not happen. Also, because inherent resistant to reform existing systems. This is just naturally a problem,
Yeah.
So we need.
Nevertheless, they need to build what's happening so that they can't tell us afterwards we didn't know.
Yeah.
And they have to be given the chance to get on the train before it's too late.
Yeah. I think the most important, we can agree with the country to let us build such a city with these constitutional amendments framework. This is very important. It's not just another city. It has to have its self-governance in place and its own framework for immigration and borders, which is very important.
But that convincing of government X that will agree to that has to be done with the business community of that country and of that society, with the youth community, with civil society, with everybody and his brother and sister. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. That's what I meant before.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good.
Michael.
Very much.
All right. So definitely important to connect the dots there. We definitely don't want to be in a silo as much as, we're looking forward to such an amazing and innovative solution to this growing crisis. So I now want to just say thank you to our audience and thank you so much to our panelists for this interesting conversation today. To our audience, I hope we've piqued your interest in the concept of global cities for refugees. We've heard that it ultimately will be an inclusive environment where refugees and other people thrive, economic inclusion, a hand up for refugees, which will have a huge return on investment for those who do invest into this concept. With that being said, I want to thank you all once again for allowing me to moderate with you all today. And now I will transition it back over to Joe.
Thanks, Lorena. And on behalf of Concordia, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again to Henley and Partners, Lorena, and today's esteemed panel for sharing their expertise and for walking us through this important issue. We hope you found this conversation to be insightful, and we are thrilled that you were a part of it. A follow-up email will be distributed next week with the recording of today's event. Thank you again, and have a great day.